Today, we're diving into a really gripping, high-stakes narrative from an ancient text. It's a story that lays out some incredibly fascinating lessons on faith, perspective, and, honestly, crisis management. We're looking at Daniel chapter 2. The whole thing is anchored in one massive idea. When human wisdom completely fails, God's wisdom prevails. And this isn't just some dusty historical account of a king having a weird dream. The text actually uses this event to show us exactly how God reveals himself to those who trust him, seek him, and give him the glory. So let's jump right into the center of the action. Picture this. King Nebuchadnezzar, the most powerful ruler on earth in Babylon, has a deeply disturbing dream. But instead of just calling in his advisors, telling them the dream and asking what it means, he issues a totally impossible demand. He tells them they have to tell him what he dreamed first and then give him the interpretation. I mean, talk about the ultimate toxic workplace environment, right? And if they fail, he threatens them with immediate execution. It's a literal ticking clock scenario with everything on the line.
So that kicks off Section 1, an impossible royal demand.
Now, when the king's advisors inevitably admit that this is an impossible task, the king loses it. He's enraged, and he orders the death of all the wise men in Babylon, which actually includes Daniel and his friends. And the text uses this intense moment to highlight our first major theme. A crisis always reveals exactly where your trust is placed. Think about it. When most of us face a massive sudden crisis, like a scary medical diagnosis, losing a job out of nowhere, or, a looming execution order, our absolute first instinct is to panic. But the narrative draws this stark contrast with Daniel. He doesn't deny the terrifying reality of the situation, but his faith reminds him of who is actually greater than that reality. He sees this not as a dead end, but as a real opportunity to seek the God who knows every mystery. He's trusting God over his own human intelligence or education.
Which brings us to Section 2, pray before you panic.
So what is Daniel's move here? How does he handle this literal death sentence? Well, he doesn't run away and he doesn't hide. According to Daniel 2:16, he goes straight in to see the king. He doesn't argue, he doesn't complain, he doesn't even blame the king for being completely unhinged. Daniel just stays incredibly calm. He simply asks for a little bit of time, and then he immediately pivots to his greatest resource. While everybody else in the palace is looking at an impossible situation, Daniel sees a moment to seek a higher power.
And the text actually gives us Daniel's exact blueprint for surviving impossible situations. It's really practical. First, stay calm when others panic. Second, seek God before you start scrambling for human solutions. Third, pray with faithful friends. And fourth, give God the glory for every answer you get. The huge lesson here is that prayer should be our very first response to a crisis, not our last desperate option when literally everything else has failed.
And honestly, step 3 of that plan is a really great detail. Notice that Daniel doesn't isolate himself. He brings his community into the mess with him, specifically his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The story points out that God so often works through community, answering prayers that are prayed together. It's such a good reminder to surround yourself with friends who will actually pray with you and seek solutions with you, rather than just people who will sit back, offer pity, and sympathize with your situation.
Let's move to Section 3, praise before the promotion.
That very night, after they pray together, the text tells us that God comes through. He reveals both the mystery of the dream and its interpretation to Daniel in a vision. So boom, the crisis is technically averted. But watch what happens next. Before Daniel rushes back to stand in front of the king, receive a massive reward, and save his colleagues' lives, he stops. He first bows before God. It's so easy to get the blessing or the breakthrough and completely forget to offer thanks, isn't it? But Daniel remembered. He paused, worshipped, and just said, "Thank you," for the answer. The takeaway is clear. Praise should always come before promotion.
Now, when Daniel finally does stand before the king, he has the perfect opportunity to take all the credit. He could have used this moment to show off and impress the single most powerful man on earth with his own supposed brilliance. But instead, what does he say? There is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets. He completely refuses to take the credit for it. He proves that true wisdom comes from God, and he deliberately points everyone's attention straight up to him.
All right, Section 4, the statue and the stone.
Let's break down this famous dream. Nebuchadnezzar saw a massive, spectacular, multi-layered statue, and it represents a sequence of human empires. The head was made of solid gold, representing Babylon itself. Below that, the chest and arms of silver represented Medo-Persia. Then came the belly and thighs of bronze, pointing to Greece, followed by the legs of iron, representing Rome, and finally the feet were a fragile mix of iron and clay, symbolizing a divided kingdom. The overarching lesson here is pretty profound.
No matter how magnificent they might look on the outside, whether they're made of gold, silver, or iron, every single earthly kingdom is eventually destined to fall, because human empires are always temporary.
But wait, the dream doesn't stop with the statue. There's this huge, dynamic turning point. Suddenly, a stone, cut without human hands, strikes the statue right on its fragile feet. It completely shatters it, and then that stone grows into a massive mountain that fills the entire earth. This indestructible stone represents God's eternal kingdom, and according to the text, it is the only kingdom that will never, ever be destroyed.
And that leads perfectly into Section 5, the ultimate eternal kingdom.
Hearing this breathtaking revelation completely changes the entire dynamic in the room. King Nebuchadnezzar, this ruthless dictator, openly acknowledges God's greatness and promotes Daniel to rule over the entire province of Babylon. The source material points back to Daniel 2:21 as the absolute heartbeat of this whole outcome. It says, "He changeth the times and the seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings." Why does that matter so much? Because Nebuchadnezzar genuinely believed that he ruled the world. But Daniel knew someone far greater ruled Nebuchadnezzar. It's this powerful reminder that while governments, economies, and cultures are always going to inevitably change, God remains completely in control of history, directing it right toward his own purposes.
So how does this all tie together into something we can actually apply to our lives today? Well, if you look at Daniel chapter 1, it teaches us about building character before a trial even comes. And then Daniel chapter 2 shows us what to do when that trial finally arrives. A life of integrity, built up before the crisis hits, perfectly matched with a life of prayer during the crisis, is what keeps us from relying solely on ourselves. When you put both character and prayer together, God's wisdom ends up being brilliantly displayed through totally ordinary people.
So I want to leave you with a real thought-provoker drawn straight from the core message of this story. When you think about that giant statue that eventually shattered and the stone that stood forever, ask yourself, are you trusting in your own human wisdom and building your life around temporary successes? Or are you depending on the eternal King who actually controls history? It's a huge perspective shift, but it's one that completely changes how we handle every single crisis we'll ever face. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep seeking out that enduring wisdom.